Well, I think we certainly Atlantis was at war with Lemuria. Atlantis was at war with the sons of Belial,
Mhm.
their own Nazis of the day. The accounts I've read far and wide say, well, this is when the bad guys find a toehold, and they're like, aha. And I think what happened was they maybe barely won that war. I think it was a shit show for all sides. Comet impacts, Atlantis was destroyed, flood. That pretty much wiped out most everyone. But it certainly created, I think, an environment for the darkness to thrive.
Mhm.
And then we get to the Anunnaki kings like Nebuchadnezzar and all these things. There's nothing but wars back then. Nothing but wars. You
And
know,
in the grand scheme of big picture
yeah,
timelines, you're discussing geological catastrophes at a point in space, which is not the only time where folks with things happening.
right.
So just because Earth was in a catastrophic situation doesn't mean there wasn't other places for things to be occurring either, lest we break out of that small-mindedness as if the only thing ever going on is what's on this blue marble in space.
Yeah. I mean, you hear people talk about the Lyran wars against the reptilians out in space that have been going on for 1 billion years. And by all accounts, everyone, who's into that side of the equation, and it says, these wars are still going on hot, and we're just sort of a sideshow, like Guadalcanal. And I liken it to Guadalcanal because it's a slog, and our history is nothing but soaked in blood.
Mm-hmm.
And so where I think this is what happens is, the Anunnaki, the gods, Moloch, everyone's sacrificing virgins and their children and all this stuff. And that's gone on till today. But that may not have provided enough, vril energy, loosh, blood, you name it, for those who have a taste for it on a grand scale. And so what I think might be going on is that in addition to all that human sacrifice, Babylon workings, stuff going on, is they've maximized wars. And I say they, the Anunnaki, the other regressives out there in space, or
Whatever
here.
factions
Yeah.
benefit from this type of activity. This reminds. I used to say, I've been saying this for years, and I know it sounds more common nowadays because people's brains go there, but this is something I've been saying for years, is that there's a shadow thing going on, right? And imagine it's thousands of years ago, right? And you're King John and I'm King Eric, and we have neighboring kingdoms. Simple thought, right? I'm in my castle, you're in your castle. My peasants bring me my things and keep me fat, and your peasants are doing the same thing.
Yeah, but I want your peasants, and I want your gold and your castle.
Not really. You and I are pals. Everything's great. We have no problems with each other. We go golfing on the weekends. Everything's awesome as far as you and I know. But as far as our peasants know, they just have work to do. And then eventually, if things are flourishing in the community and my kingdom is thriving, it might get to the point where those peasants are so not preoccupied that they start wondering about me and my lethargy and all the tithings they have to give to me. At which some point in time, my right-hand man will come to me and say, hey, there's the village is getting a little crazy out there. It's about that time, I think. Oh, it's about that time, huh?
Yeah.
Send my curry over to King John. I go, John, my peasants are getting a little kooky again. Oh, I just noticed mine are getting a little kooky too.
Yep.
War! And then next thing you know, I throw a couple of uniforms from my guys over in your direction, and you guys burn down one of your own villages, leave some of my uniforms there, and blame my guys and stuff like that. And I just figured that this type of war and purging, at the very least, was political. That's where my brain went. And I can see that. But now you're bringing it a step further, because it's almost like you're saying that not only is that going on, but these kings can actually profit, because there could be a third party involved that is like, you know what this war could be worth to you guys?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And well, most wars are political, but and sometimes religious. But I think a lot of that is an excuse. I mean, if you go back to World War I, Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, So what? The reason the war started more than anything is because big industry and other nations had all these new toys and ships, and they were getting into aircraft
Mm-hmm.
soon, in 1913 or whatever, 14, and they were itching to go to war,
Mm-hmm.
just itching. And so, a war stirs up patriotism and nationalism and things like that. And it's like, God is on our side. I always love that one. God is on our side. Or, those people worship a different God. Let's
Mm-hmm.
kick their ass.
Mm-hmm.
It's any excuse under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at the top levels, the kings and queens, the royals, the elite, they're making backdoor deals, interdimensional. Certainly the Anunnaki never left. And so the deal is, you want to win this war? Okay, bring us the most casualties. Now, that's just a theory of mine, but certainly there are others who have thought along these lines. It's horrifying. We got enough horror to deal with anyway in the whole disclosure arena.
Mm-hmm.
But this is something I don't think we should turn away from, because, look how big the American military, industrial, intelligence, corporate complex is,
Mm-hmm.
and the many trillions needed to fund it.
Mm-hmm.
Something big is going on. People are, there's no secret space program. It's like, I beg to differ, because you can't spend that much money on antiquated aircraft carriers, and they keep it. I'm subscribed to two military channels.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, look at the new fighter coming out. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
jet engines are a 1930s technology.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, optical invisibility, the F-35.
I've been to the ice cube neutrino detector at the South Pole, and I am a tradesman, and I'm familiar with materials and labor. And when people hear the bill for what that structure is tagged out at, it is some god awful number. It said like $500 billion for that facility or something.
And who knows if that's true?
Correct. Correct. Absolutely. And it's a lot of it was just melting ice. So it's not a lot of structure there.
Yeah. When Catherine Austin Fitts was interviewed, I think by Daniel List or someone, she's like, I just stopped counting at some point. I believe that's what she said. I certainly don't want to put words in her mouth, but I respect her work and her findings. Mm-hmm. And she's like, at a certain point, you just got to stop counting.
Yeah.
Because she's just finding more and more black drains where all this cash is going down. Mm-hmm. And she can only estimate, that since I think World War II, there's a missing probably 30 trillion, but who knows how many trillions it's been. It could be quadrillions, because we're not sure what the GDP of the United States really truly is. I know it's more than what they say it is. Yeah, and then and Reuters came out with an article. I've got a clipping of it if you want it. And
that's amazing.
The Army says they lost 2.3 trillion. This is later, 2000.
That's one of the most amazing two steps that I've ever seen put right before people's very eyes. Day one, September 10th, we lost $2.3 trillion. Oops, our bad. The next day, we're going to need another check for shitloads of money, and you guys will write that for us, right? Yeah, no problemo.
Right. And so, but getting back to the original topic of the occult, I think Walter Bosley wrote in his, I'm pretty sure he did, in one of the books I read, and he said Aleister Crowley, he was the foremost occultist of the 20th century, mm-hmm. I think, bar none. He worked for all sides. He was a double, triple agent, Yeah. He was only working for Crowley.
Yeah, I was going to say he was all about himself.
Right. And so what I think Crowley found, and this is just my view, at the end of his life, he teamed up with Jack Parsons. He was feeding him, step-by-step Enochian magic rituals. Jack Parsons was kind of a beer-drinking womanizer, a brilliant guy, but he kind of fucked it all up and never got it.
He had his vices that could be manipulated.
Right. And so there's a rumor going around that in 46 or 47, they did a Babylon workings together at the site of Area 51, which I think was an ancient site. I know the Native American tribes in the area viewed it as sacred. Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of these DUMs and military bases are. They're built over these sacred sites, which really pisses off, all the Southwest Native American tribes to no end. But of course, they don't get much of a voice. And so there were probably, according to David Adair, he said there were huge ancient tunnels going every which way, under Area 51 and S4 and Indian Springs. There's tons of real estate down there. And so I believe that story. It makes sense. But, I think what happened to Crowley was at the end of his life, in his deathbed, he said, "I am most bewildered." Because what I think he found out was that no matter how precise his rituals were and how devoted he was to revering these regressive ET gods, or, whoever you want to call them, and he drew one that looked just like a gray alien. You can see those drawings. They're in his, probably find them on the internet. I think he found out that they were really using him. Mm-hmm. And they were like, we got a sucker this time. John D. Oh yeah, he was great. And everything like that. And, but we really got a live one with Crowley. And he did all kinds of work for his proxy masters in the shadows. And they were just using him. And so they used him up by the end of his life. I think he was a heroin addict and a broken man. And he tried everything. And I write it in my book that Churchill meets with him. And the rumor is that Churchill did meet with him. Mm-hmm. But I think he had a hand, personally, I think he had a hand, not only in World War I, but World War II, in maximizing, as a double agent, triple agent, he'd say, well, listen, Mr. Churchill, maybe you should do this. And I see the probabilities in my, my scrying tablet, which he had. I wrote that he has John Dee's scrying tablet. Churchill liberated it from the museum to give to him in my book. I think Crowley was manipulated by people in the shadows, regressives, for sure. And the more deaths, it occurred in the war, certainly on the Russian front. Joseph Farrell says it and others say it. The official word from Putin is 27 million. Yes, starvation and disease played a part, but come on. How do you kill that many people?
I am curious. It's
closer to 30 million. I think Igor Rotowski says it's probably 30 or 33 million is the real. The Allies barely lost 1 million casualties.
Could you put a finger on any data that would state that in history was the most catastrophic event? Like when we're talking, like if these are scheduled events for like a loose gathering, then straight up loss of life in mass in a short period of time, I imagine, is the goal. Is there anything historically that seems to be the greatest event, so to say? Because it just makes me wonder what that time period would be and what's going on and who was answering to who then,
In ancient times, we never saw, you saw great casualties, but it's got to be World War I.
Okay.
It was just a pig slaughter.
Okay.
Guys died for nothing.
Understood.
They put new recruits in the trenches. They blew a whistle and up, Gallipoli, the movie Gallipoli. They blew a whistle and they went up, full kit, gear, training, everything, and just mowed down by machine guns.
Yeah, it was my understanding, from the limited studying I've done in World War I and the technologies, is that they had advanced the ability to defend positions so much further than the ability to move at something offensively that, it was just like you said, defensive positions would just mow people down for days.
Yeah, and gas. That was just horrific. But going back to the mass death ritual, I think there's something to that. Wars are multi-purpose. You go back into history, it's political, it's religious, it's a way to keep your people occupied, it's a way of producing esprit de corps in an officer class. There's a multitude of reasons. War is a racket.
Things are yes.
Money, the guys making the flintlock muskets and arquebuses and other things. Those guys are making the tradesmen.
It doesn't seem like a stretch in my mind. Like I imagine, like let's just say it's nowadays, full contemporary tactics and folks involved. Let's just say there's a war going on and there's bad people selling out some of our people contemporarily, and they turn to one of our guys and they'll go, "Hey, when we're discharging our folks to them, just grab one of the boxes off of their ship, just whatever you can get."
Sure.
Why wouldn't that stuff happen?
Yeah, why not? Because it's multi-purpose. So if a king meets with some regressive bad guys,
Mhm.
you know, it's like, sure, take as many of the dead and missing as you want. I don't care as long as I win.
Mhm.
And they're like, okay, we'll see, and maybe we'll grant you a wish. Oh, genie, the jinn, whatever it is, and certainly it makes sense because. Um, you get a lot. The winners get a lot out of war, and the losers get jack squat.
Mhm.
So it's not. There's always going to be a winner and loser. Oh, you lost, and you have 500,000 missing. Great. Oh, you won, and you have 500,000 missing. Great. Somebody makes out like the mob on both ends.
Mhm.
The other, if you fast forward to Vietnam,
Mhm.
I talked to a guy that I know. I only know his first name, but I know he's a military guy. I can tell. And I talked to a lot of these guys. And this is one of the wounded veterans that we had at our farm
Mhm.
for that event. He turned me on to this guy. He's like, you and my friend should talk. And I said, that's fine. I always like to talk to veterans. And so I'm talking with him, and he's like, he said, look, I was in Nam in '66, and I was with a Ranger battalion,
Mhm.
and we were, you know, he's like, I'm not going to say we had some special training, but we had special training, and the concept of UFOs and aliens was broached in that training. And I said, I understand, I understand. This is '66.
Mhm.
And he said, my battalion went into the jungle somewhere close to the Laos border.
Mhm.
That they were going back and forth, Cambodia and Laos. Everyone thinks it's Vietnam, but the whole three countries were just warfare everywhere.
Mhm.
And he said we were probably in Cambodia somewhere. And he's like, I don't remember the mission, but I remember I was one of the 20, I don't know how many guys that survived, but the rest of them were gone. And I said, well, were they casualties? What happened? Taken prisoner? He's like, no, they just simply vanished. And we went back looking for them with another unit and everything, and they were just gone.
Mhm.
Now, he said he saw a lot of weird things, and he definitely saw UFOs in Vietnam. They were all over the place.
Okay.
And he's like, I don't know what happened. Now, another story, and I can't remember where I read this, but it might have been Richard Dolan or one of his books or someone else's book. But there was a unit sent, an Air Force unit, combat unit, sent to retrieve the bodies of a B-52 bomber that went down over North Vietnam from a SAM missile. And they got to the wreckage, and there were gray aliens there taking the bodies away.
Hmm.
And they actually shot at them.
Huh.
And, oh, yeah,
Meaning our guys shooting at the Grays.
you better believe it, because
Okay.
whatever Air Force unit this was, they were not trained in this.
Okay.
And they didn't know what these things were or who these people were. And so there was some combat going back and forth.
Okay.
And in that same story, one of the guys says he was taken underground there somewhere in North Vietnam. And the Greys had a facility there, an underground base.
Mhm.
And they were doing, genetic this, that, and the other
Mhm.
with not only dead soldiers, but with live personnel.
Mhm.
And so when I read that, that was a long time ago. I read that. That really disturbed me.
Mhm.
And there are other reports by soldiers of strange spider-type beings in the jungle, uh, bodies piled in ziggurat pyramid fashion. Like, who the hell would do that 50 feet high? And I'm like, I see a disturbing trend, series of dots that are connecting on their own. And I don't think there were a lot of personnel in Vietnam who knew this was going on. I think there were probably maybe 100 guys or less, but they had, they were CIA or who knows what uniform they wore. It doesn't matter. They're just guys that are in the projects, black project guys out there and going, look, we need to take this and, take this objective and this is what we need to trade. Send your guys here. And I'm sure the generals and colonels were like, what the fuck are we doing there? That's Charlie has tunnels. We're never going to, and they're like, just do it.
Mhm.
And this happens. 100, 300 guys just disappear. No gear, no guns, no nothing. That's what this guy said.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. And then when he went back to Vietnam, I think he told me, this guy said, "Oh no, I went back with a group of vets and we talked to our Vietnamese counterparts, and they were like, yeah, we've had missing too, because this guy who went down into the underground base, he said it was Vietnamese and American personnel with the Greys. So they were not, they were indiscriminate."
Mm-hmm.
And so they couldn't get an answer out of the Vietnamese guy. Said, yeah, we had the same problem. Guys would just disappear. And we figured you guys captured them. And we were like, no. And so, piece that group of dots, uncomfortable dots together. And I thought this dovetails into Crowley's mentioning that wars are a mass death ritual.
Yeah,
I don't remember if Bosley concluded that or it was based on Crowley's information, but somewhere in that mix in Bosley's books, he purports that, and I thought, my God, this is huge.
And certainly,
this isn't just a few people. This is millions and millions.
Right. When you're talking about these numbers, it's certainly never been something I've ever noticed on the American side, specifically to like the Vietnam War. I don't recall ever seeing things like, 1,000 or 2,000 Vietnamese prisoners being taken at once. Like that didn't seem to be like an activity. I imagine if that was going on, that would be newsworthy, that at the time of the war, oh, we've captured 2,000 prisoners today. But that didn't ever seem to be getting reported. So I don't imagine they were doing the same thing on the other side either. It makes sense. This whole disappearing thing is being a reciprocal process that we're both just losing folks. I was really shocked to hear that they would happen so fast in the missing. Like I grew up with POW, MIA flags and stuff like that. I remember seeing them, and I just always thought of MIA as 100 dudes go out and one goes missing. Yeah, that's the way my brain was looking at it. But now to hear that it's the reverse, it's like it really, really changes things, and a lot now, actually. It changes my perspective a lot because I grew up in a extremely veteran community. So the Palmia flags and shirts and the bikers and stuff, it was a huge thing. So now in a way, I look at all of them differently because I feel like they were in the know. They understood what that MIA part meant, and I did not.
Yeah, I thought it was just, and the rumors of guys still living in North Vietnam, I'm sure there's one or two or three guys who did that and said, screw this. I don't want to fight for America. I just want to live in Vietnam in peace.
Right.
I'm sure there were a few guys that did that, but come on, but I think, they lied to us. We know now, and my dad said so. We talked about the Vietnam War a lot. And he's like, your hippie mother was right. The war was bad. They lied to us about the Gulf of Tonkin. That was bullshit. False flag operation. And the numbers of dead and missing and body counts. The big deal was enemy body count. But they lied about all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. What do you even do with those numbers? Like in my head, I was just thinking, I wonder what the actual count was. What do they record for actual missing in the Vietnam War? And I was thinking, I'm like, well, that's not like what's going to be the accurate number there anyway.
I don't know. Somebody must have a website that gives a number of missing from the war. The war went on a long time. I mean, 61, we had advisors in there with Kennedy.
Right, yeah. When did it actually start? Like I know that it was like officially in the mid-60s, but we had activities going on for quite some time.
Yeah. Kennedy was assassinated for a million reasons. But JFK was also, when he was a young congressman, in 1952, he went to Vietnam to view the French because America wanted France and NATO. And so we were giving them World War II weapons and everything they needed to fight this war of insurgency. And he witnessed the folly of it. And his report to Congress, I think in 53, was like, this is unwinnable. The French are fools. They're fighting a guerrilla warfare with, trails and underground tunnels and God knows what else. Most people don't remember that John Kennedy had gone to Vietnam as a younger man. He knew it was folly. Mm-hmm. So, of course, the military industrial complex wanted to go into Vietnam, big money, and they did. That was one of the other reasons he was assassinated, amongst many others. But when I started to piece this together, and it's just sort of maybe a few of us, I think Bosley probably understands it, Farrell, maybe a few others, it's not pretty to think about, and it's very. When I see those MIA guys, they come into DC every year,
Mm-hmm.
with the Harleys on Memorial Day,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, God, I don't want to be the one to break it to Vietnam vets that this is what happened,
Mm-hmm.
that to their MIA buddies, was dead or alive. Some of these guys ended up on the table or cut up into chunks or sold on some galactic black market.
Not for nothing. Those guys can take it. I imagine would be. I mean, they would probably just rather have closure.
Right.
I'm sure they can understand that there was an additional enemy on the battlefield. I bet you they can wrap their head around that logic.
I'm sure there's some Vietnamese veterans and some American veterans in Vietnam on a beach somewhere drinking beer and going, I saw this UFO, and all of a sudden 20 of my guys disappeared.
Hell yeah.
I'm sure they're discussing that in private.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to say it publicly. I think it's war is more of a racket than we think. It's like, sure, everyone makes money, but guess who, really gets a lot of, genetics and, God forbid, knows, I don't know what else from all that, those missing.
The idea of this works in my head because it makes more sense of the motives of war than what we're currently presented.
Yeah.
Because you're right. There's really no reason for us to line up on sides of the field in mass and at the end of the day just have piles of dead bodies. Like, who does benefit from that? And if we can start look to a process that shows motives and benefits and then follow them back to the sources, it's just like fighting crime. They say follow the money. It's the same darn thing. Yeah. It's just we're realizing that war is more of a criminal activity than just a happenstance of bad politics.
Yeah, and it was probably an agreement by both sides in Vietnam, I'm guessing, at the top levels. And there was a Christopher Walken movie about being on board a UFO.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I believe it's in one of those two. He comes upon inside the craft, there's like 25 dead soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was in the book version that I read, and the guy was like, "What are these soldiers doing here?" And the Gray said to him, "Oh, they're dead, so we're just going to give them, I don't know, a proper burial or their time." They agreed to it in some sort of soul contract or some bullshit that a gray alien would say, because gray aliens are not to be trusted; they're regressives. That's another piece of evidence of this puzzle. Was in that book written by that guy. He saw dead soldiers on board the craft. And I think I've read other reports where people have seen inside craft soldiers from another era, like Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what are these guys in Civil War costumes doing here? And it's like, oh no, they were on the battlefield. We just scooped them up. Fair's fair. So time, the time, it doesn't matter. Space travel is time travel. So, I mean, you could swoop back to any war and scoop up the dead as long as it doesn't mess up the timeline. Because the regressives and the positives are all manipulating these timelines, and they don't want to fuck them up too bad, so they want to take the dead and the missing, and it's just, it doesn't affect the timeline because, probably there's some sort of cosmic quantum entanglement going on here.
It sounds to me like that this would be a side activity from what would be what I'm presuming would be the initial Loosh gathering, which would be at the time of demise, that there's something going on when the people are dying, right? Yeah. To collect that energy, I guess. But now it sounds like that if you're saying post-mortem, that the bodies also have value, it sounds like, that this is now a commodity of some sort?
Yeah, I mean, according to all the super soldiers, pretty much, you can be reanimated if you're not dead too long.
Okay, that's true too.
Go on with spaceship, and they got a room full of green slime tanks. You can regenerate anyone.
So they could also be so they could be regenerating them. That's the list of what you can do with the commodity, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. For some, it's food. Sadly, lions, tigers, and bears. I mean,
right.
It makes as above, so below. It's
something wants to eat us for sure.
Yeah, if the flesh is from a dead body, what does it matter? As long as it's still relatively fresh, you can use the genetics. Or I don't know, maybe it can be a year old. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, wars are just senseless now. I mean, they keep them on the boil in the Middle East. Everyone knows now why. It's just not only it's religious and political, but there's underground facilities. There's ancient Anunnaki technology all over the place, portals, stargates, energy sites. I think they tested Project Looking Glass one time. I have it in my notes. They tested it over a buried temple in Abydos.
Mm-hmm.
And they must have done it at night. And, but they were, it was U.S. Army. It was
that's a project that I'm very interested in as well. What would be your thoughts on Project Looking Glass? How would you explain that to someone?
Oh, forget it. I mean, I heard your interview with Johnny, and it's like, good luck talking to anyone about this. It's taken me 30 years to slowly have the uptake of information and piece it all together. And it's still,
this is a hard one for me because, like you said, you heard me talking with Johnny. The topic of time travel comes up.
Yeah, and that one really blew me away. I don't know about you, but
I'm comfortable with it. I'm actually it's for me, I guess it's a weird thing. To me, it explains a lot more of our problems that we have collectively right now when we add into the mix that time travel is there. It's part of the equation. But the problem is trying to explain that to other people, because I do realize that my acceptance of it is, I guess, premature in society, that most people aren't ready to wrap their heads around the fact that A, time travel is possible, and B, other people have been working in the medium forever.
Yeah.
It would be like, here we are on Earth, right? And, X amount of decades ago, we learned that we could fly. It doesn't mean that flying was invented. We just gained access to something that could always be going on and would be going on other, like, it exists. Flying exists. We just became part of the activity. So now here we are. Time travel exists. We're just becoming part of the activity as a group. But has to be an understanding that through society, there's been an aspect of individuals that have been working in this medium.
Yeah. The problem is society is lied to about physics and everything.
Right. Yeah.
And,
physics is way off.
Yeah. Gravity is from electromagnetism from the sun. There's a billion types of gravity, not just one.
Mm-hmm.
It holds matter together, which is holographic in nature. And space travel is time travel. So out in space, not on the Earth in 3D or whatever, but out in space, time is just it's something you plug into the GPS computer and says, well, I need to go with Eric and have a hamburger in that neighboring galaxy. Oh, and I got to pick up an umbrella. Mm-hmm. And then we got to be back here right now. And we can do it. Mm-hmm. And it's not a big deal because you don't, you can manipulate it. Well, I want to go to the past or I want to do this. But you start causing ripples in times. The problem right now is the Earth. It's always been a timeline war, because wars are part and parcel of the physics of the universe, whether or not they tell us it is or not. But all wars are temporal in nature.
All possibility exists somewhere. Like, everything that could happen is at a place and a time, and it is all in motion as well. So even if you wanted to go back to the same place in time, it actually has reoriented. Like, that event has relocated still. It's in flux and in motion.
The weird thing about it was, in this book, is that when we do go back in the past and muck with stuff, mm-hmm. We're changing our past for you and me, for everyone. But out in space, it's not that big a deal. It's like, all right, we need to go here and pick up some, fishing gear and go fish on this other planet. And they just plug all that in, or it's all mental, and everyone moves in a mothership, that's all, bio and constructed out of their own DNA, and everyone's one with the craft and everything like that, and they just move through time, and it's like, what's the big deal? It's only to us. It's like, oh my God, H.G. Wells, how did he know? And it's not really like what H.G. Wells was saying. That was his 19th century occult version of, Jules Verne. They were all kind of tapped into occult society. They kind of knew what was around and what had happened in the past, more so than the average person by 20,000 leagues. It's just this weird. Time is a weird component to deal with because we're so attached to our concept of linear time. Yesterday was yesterday, today was today. The calendars, watch, it's all like, you really don't need that.
Right.
But in our reality right now, we need those things. But the problem is digesting a lot of these concepts and everything. It is truly hard.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think 20 years ago is when I sort of started to understand time a little better. And I was like, holy shit. And it's a fascinating but mind-boggling subject.
Mm-hmm.
Just that. And when I mentioned to some friend who was like, tell me about UFOs, and I started mentioning time travel, they were just like, oh, whoa. You've been watching too many movies. And I said, well, yes, but, they have some interesting information in them. But you have to read books too.
For sure.
And so this is one of the big hurdles, I think, where, I'm full disagreement with people. Oh, we can red pill people. Well, you can only red pill those people that are beginning the awakening process. So in effect, yes, but no, because they're doing it anyway. You've just told a story to somebody who's already in the awakening process, and I've talked to people who are just sort of awakening to some of this. And they're like, well, I understand UFOs and ET and other worlds, but this time travel and military stuff, I just don't buy that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like a staircase. I mean, they're at one step and they're comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
This happens in the disclosure movement as well. I'm not knocking people at all, but they've reached a certain step and they're like, you know what, I'm good here.
Yep.
I like the view, the information I've gotten from the other steps. It's great, but I'm going to stay here.
Absolutely. Get their comfort zone.
Yeah, this whole thing about regressive ETs and all that stuff, that scares me. No. And that's their choice and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of us that are like, pardon me as I move up, because I want to consider
the hard truth.
Everything.
Yep.
And and to some people, I don't blame them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't blame them at all, because the stuff we're talking about today is horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh shit, I don't know. Albert Pike and the Freemasons. He was a bad dude. Talk about the Aleister Crowley. Before there was Crowley, there was Albert Pike. He was the grand poobah Freemason in the South. Mm-hmm. He was a bad dude. I'm sure he sacrificed many a person in a basement of a mansion somewhere. Probably a lot of slaves, sadly. Mm-hmm. I heard a story, and I don't know if it's true, but that George Washington, since he was a Freemason, he was sacrificing some of his slaves in rituals.
I'd never heard that either.
No, and I was, George Washington is the man. He owned slaves. I don't like that, but he wanted to free. Just after he died, I want to live in luxury until I die. But, he's mostly on the side of the positive, I think, won the war, sort of. The British East India Company made out on both sides. That was the real deep state of the English,
That was, a lot of people aren't familiar with the Dutch East India Company, and
them too, but really the British East India Company, when it was chartered, they had their own army, their own navy.
The British.
Their own leaders, their own uniforms, their own security guards, their own ships.
But that's correct. But correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't the Dutch East India Company actually exceed them in volumes of these things? Weren't they like the largest army and navy at one point?
Yeah, early on. And then the British, I think, around the mid-19th century surpassed them.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, what does that sound like today? Sounds like the CIA, the DIA, black program.
People have no idea. They have no idea. Yep, they have no idea that we have an entire other massive Air Force and Navy for the CIA.
And the space, parts of the Space Force.
Yeah, people have no idea. Like there's carriers out there for the CIA. There's bombers for the CIA. I mean, come on. Submarines for the CIA.
I think it was Joseph Farrell who said that Deutsche Bank has its own black ops, battalion.
Oh, I believe it.
You send the battalion out to, it's just a bank.
I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember which store. I've worked in a lot of corporations. I can't remember which one it was exactly. I'm going to guess that it was something like a Walmart corporation that I was communicating with someone with. And they were stating that they have a crew at the ready. If there's mutterings in a store about unionizing, they will fire everyone in that damn store and they will fly in that crew to staff that place until they can hire more locals again. They have that at the ready. And wouldn't it also be a consideration when you have folks that have looking glass technologies available to them? Many factions do now. That as much as they might be like, that Warner guy's pissing us off this month, we need to do something about it. But then somebody comes running in, but remember in 2030, the looking glass says that we need him to do such and such. So be quiet and take what Warner's saying. That could be going on too. I've been following James Giordano. He does a wonderful talk on neuroweapons and the battlefield of the mind, and that's where we're at today, like you were saying with the red pill. Like, you can't force a red pill on someone, especially in the environment that we're in, because blue pills are being handed out not only for free, but with all kinds of incentives that go with them. Sure. So you're very challenged to get somebody to see things from a red pill perspective today, when the blue pill is just being like mass marketed and everybody's asking for it. Like they just keep, oh yeah, tell me the bullshit.
I'd like to know why this planet, apparently is this special planet. Well, they terraformed it, 12 billion years ago, I guess, says Alex Collier, at least, to be this special garden planet. Earth is this Wild West. I've also heard that, it's the Wild West. Mm-hmm. So it's like, hey, do whatever you want there, because it's out of the legal zone. It's in the, the Romulan neutral zone. Do anything you want. And I think it got out of hand. I think the dinosaur experiment definitely got out of hand. Someone lobbed a bunch of comments on that one. I think you and I can guess who were doing those experiments, and they got out of hand. And then the mammals arose and whatever. I'm not a big fan of evolution. I think it's full of holes.
Big holes, because they're lying about the timetables.
Yeah. That's why everyone, I agree with Alex Collier. 12 billion years sounds a little more plausible because you can do more over a longer period of time.
For sure.
Why someone said 4 billion, I don't know. It could have been an idiot geologist going, the layer says 4 billion. And
what we'll learn in a billion years from now is how a billion years ago they didn't know anything about math and calculating stuff. So just like now, we look back at science from 400 years ago and we laugh at them and what they surmised because of the context they were working in. How were they supposed to know otherwise? But regardless, their science is now knuckleheadedness. And in 100 years from now, our science today will be knuckleheadedness.
Right.
Do not need to be so endearing to the science of today, folks, especially with all the shenanigans going on in the world and people screaming from the mountaintops that you can't argue with science. Sit any scientist next to me. I will destroy him on almost anything he considers himself an expert in, because there's cracks in any dam, and it takes very few questions to take any expert and have them simply say, I don't know. That's a good question.
Oh, don't get me started. I mean,
right?
My studies in histories, the historians I've contacted,
supposed experts.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, what about this? And they're like, we may never know how they did that. And they always say that about the pyramids when you did get too close to the truth. A mainstream academia person will say, well, we may never know, and it's a conversation ender. There's 2 websites about star forts, but those guys aren't military historians. They're just saying, wow, this looks like a harmonious, peaceful thing for the world. And, the ancients built them. And it's like, well, no, they were built for war, I think. But why? And why are there so anomalies? And some of them don't look like they were built for war at all.
I feel like they were resurfaced for war.
Yeah. Okay, it's a vantage point for a cannon, big deal. A hill will do that for you. Mm-hmm. A lot of the anomalies, but the other people, that one guy I talked to, he's like, I don't want to talk to you. I want to formulate my own, wizards and warlocks version of this. And I'm like, okay, don't you understand about Marshal Vauban and a 12-pounder cannon versus a 24-pounder versus a 12-inch mortar versus a 16-inch mortar? And he's like, no. And here's a guy who's a website for Star Forts, and he doesn't want any more knowledge from me. And I'm like, I'm a military historian. Let's figure this out. And he's like, no.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of folks that find things to be a curiosity, and they leave it at that.
Yeah.
I've always liked the term "elevate your mind."
Yeah.
Just as
people are like, no, I understand his angle. He wants to come up with his own theories, and I appreciate that. But you can't avoid. It's not like Star Forts are that much of a mystery. They were built for war.
But then his theory would still have to stand up to questioning.
Yeah, and he just wants to, I don't know, smoke pot or do his thing. And you know, I'm not going to name names, but you know, and the other guy just simply won't return my emails. And these guys come out with websites on, you know, anomalies of old buildings and doing all this stuff, and they're like, you know, there's this one famous British guy, and he's going, oi, look at this, mate, look at this, and he does a great job of putting up all these obscure images from the last 1,000 years that are in archives, but he doesn't know a chimney from a fireplace. And they're like, oh, free energy fireplaces, and I'm like, no, that's for coal. Well, as you and I know, there's a lot of disinformation, you know, out there in the internet, and you know, by a lot of that is due to the deep state or whoever putting out, you know, let's distract, you know, these idiots with this.
Was it Colby? Was it Colby, the director of the CIA back in the day, that said, we'll start putting misinformation out into the American public, and when the day hits that when we see everybody just speaking gibberish, we know we've accomplished our mission?
And they did. We don't know what the truth is from anything, because we don't even know what the truth looks like anymore. I think you and I do, because we're studied into this world of esoterica.
Oh, totally.
It's taken me a lifetime of studying military history, guns, ships, planes, tactics, the people involved, kings, queens, royalty, and then the last 15 years, the occult, and you know, the Sufi wisdom, the mystery schools, the Egyptian mystery schools, the anti-gravity, the Freemasons, and the Hellfire Club. Holy shit!
It has taken a lot of effort on my part, John, I would say, and you must have done the exact same thing, but it has taken a lot of effort for me to be able to stand on my own 2 feet today and know when someone's lying to me. Yeah, and a lot of people don't have that anymore.
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people mean well on the internet.
I get that.
Disclosure, alternative history. They mean well. But if you're a 21-year-old guy going, I'm going to put a website up for Star Forts, and then go out there and say the magic elves built them, and, you know, it's not helping so much. And, you know, I've left my forum. I just can't. For every 10 minds that are digging into things with an open mind, there's 100 that say, I came here for the mud floods in Tartaria. And it's like, yes, Tartaria existed, but it's not this big conspiracy theory. There were some towns, the Russians incorporated it. They just said, oh, to hell with Tartaria. It's all Russia now. It's not that big of a deal. And they're thinking, no, the ancient world was there. Sure, I think in pre-Diluvian times, Siberia was warmer. There were a lot of towns, you know, but I don't see giant crystal cities, you know, any evidence of that. I'm not saying they're not underground somewhere. You know, there's a lot of weird stuff going on our planet, but
that'd be a whole other story.
I just, you know, I mean, I quit. I mean, it's insane. I can't talk sense to even some other historians who are way out of the box. I'm out of the box. Yeah, which box?
Exactly. That's the thing. Is that
bigger box.
Correct. And that's the thing that I think I'm trying to do now is decompartmentalize everything, because I think that's what we're finding out is there's just so many different compartments. There's so many different areas that we've been corralled in with misinformation. It's like, choose whatever lie you want. Whatever, you know, story you were told is probably not as accurate if you do more digging. And then, like you said, there's people that'll dig into this. There's people that want to look at that. There's people that don't want to look over here. But I think this is why we all as a group need to, at the very least, take the things that we are interested in and get to the actual root of the problem to get real truth on all of our topics. Because I think you're right. What we're learning in our continued communications, John, is that we've been lied to on every level. It doesn't really matter which way we look, right? And I made the point before that, you know, as recently as a CIA director was talking about confusing the masses I don't
Yeah.
think he was the first one to have that idea historically. I think this is an ongoing thing that folks like you and I see with great ease. You know, we may not have all of the answers, but what we do know is the answers that are so easily distributed to the masses are just simply lies.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back 12,000 years to the Anunnaki,
Mm-hmm.
where the different bloodlines of human beings went out,
Mm-hmm.
the different six major bloodlines, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And what did the Anunnaki do? They kept them fighting amongst themselves so they would be distracted, so they wouldn't rise up against their true masters,
Mm-hmm.
in the shadows. And, there has to be not only a huge open mind, but also a measure of logic and reasoning that's just wanting. And it's like the disclosure movement at large. It's factionalized,
Mm-hmm.
and there are different factions and groups. And, 30 years ago, when Stephen Greer, Richard Dolan, and Stephen Bassett, and Linda Moulton Howe, and other people, 35 years ago, were talking about UFOs and military abductions and the Greys,
Mm-hmm.
guess what people were calling them? Madmen and madwomen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 35 years later or whatever, Stanton Friedman was, he's a UFO nut. Everyone, all my friends call me a UFO nut.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is factionalized. Everything. And so now people are like, oh, no. This secret space program and all these super soldiers, no way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's what they were saying about these
UFOs.
foundational people who did foundational work.
Mm-hmm.
They did huge amounts.
Mm-hmm.
30 plus years ago, they were calling them crazy. And I don't want to, oh no, there's no aliens involved. It's all, just the military. And no, they were all called crackpots and everything. Now they're doing the same to you, me, and the whole, the wild stuff.
I like how folks, they're now saying, oh, the government is now telling us that UFOs are real. And it's like, hold on a second. UFOs have always been real. The only thing the government's done is change their position on being honest about it.
Yeah.
They're just admitting they were lying. That's what's going on. They didn't just let us know UFOs are real. They let us know they're going to stop lying about it. Considering the level of misinformation that we're at now through the entire mass of the planet, right? I would say we're all highly misinformed in mass right now. But I wonder how long it's been since the vast majority of the people on this planet were properly informed together. How long ago? I wonder on that. Like, we're so misinformed right now in mass, and we do have cycles. I wonder, when the hell was the last time on this planet we were all accurately on the same page?
I'd have to say before the Great Flood. After the Great Flood, there was kings and royalty that knew some of the history, and they kept it alive. And the mystery schools, some of the engineering that the Freemasons and the Egyptians had, and some of that to use in cathedrals and star forts and other constructions.
Okay.
They had some of that pre-Diluvian knowledge that, Earth was a Grand Central Station, and it was no big deal. Every day in Atlantis, there were people of all different sizes and colors from everywhere in the galaxy and beyond. And so it was an international, very erudite and high civilization that just fed.
But now, following this question to its literal conclusion, you said pre-Diluvian, pre-flood, right?
Yeah.
When would you literally say, how long ago was that actually in the grand scheme of the misinformation that we've been presented?
Well, the geologists like Robert Schoch dated the bathtub trench of the Sphinx in the Giza Plateau to 12,500 years, somewhere, give or take 100 years or so, because of the erosion patterns of the water. Where'd that water come from? Could have been related to the Great Flood. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I've been told, and I've interviewed some archaeologists and geologists, the rock strata doesn't lie.
Mm-hmm.
Archaeologists lie all day long. Whoa. And the layers around the world strongly suggest that there was a cataclysm somewhere around 12,500 years ago, give or take a few hundred years, in that flexible, but basically that time period. and it's evident.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey has been dated to 12,500 years ago by geologists. You know, Schmidt, the guy, the head archaeologist, did a smart thing.
Mm-hmm.
He knew, and so now National Geographic and the Royal Society, everyone's like, wow, civilization's older than we thought.
Mm-hmm.
That's because they were pushed.
Mm-hmm.
Before it was 6,000 years. Now it's more than double that.
I think it's a lot longer than this, because even when you talk about Göbekli Tepe being 12,000 years ago, of being a substantial civilization and a flood, to me, that can be true. And it can also be true that that flood occurred and we still had not risen to the level of elevation from a prior position. Still, like, it doesn't mean that the last flood was the one that knocked us from our highest level of elevation. It could still just be another flood that was happening in our recurring cycle. So that still doesn't lead back to the original question of how long ago since we were all informed. We still really don't know from the angle that you went.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I
Right.
would say before the Great Flood, but you also have to take into account the possibility of under-earth, inner-world civilizations that, you know,
That may have learned eons ago to avoid the flooding cycles.
Right. And a lot of the stories purport that a lot of Atlanteans were like, we're moving underground. The rest of the people were like, you're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You remember in the original Superman movie where his father Jor-El said the planet Krypton is breaking up, and all the scientists were like, nah, it's shifting its orbit. You're an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
And of course he was proven right, but he died in it.
Right.
I think there was some of that going on. That's also a parable, I think, the whole Superman story. That a lot of people were like, okay, have fun. And they just moved underground. You know, they had all this high technology. They were probably a fifth density society with all those kinds of powers and skills. And so they did that. And of course, there were some other people hanging out there that have civilizations under the earth for, I don't know, billions of years. You know, this planet, people love to think it's just the surface. It's like, no.
Exactly. That's the direction I'm
Not
going.
all lava down there. There's
right.
some lava.
So exactly. That's what I was getting at. So when you talk about going back to being totally informed, and you start talking about flooding issues, that would be surface history. Maybe that's not the extent of us being informed. If our history goes beyond the surface to a point of depth, it just keeps going and going. And that's where I think it's so amazing, this whole circle of life, and where does it begin and where does it end?
I think in the 50s, General Eisenhower was given Hobson's choice by 3 E.T. Goops that were all kind of working in with each other. They're like, this guy's a sucker.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there was one benevolent group that came in and said, hey, we'll help you with your spirituality. It's like, screw you. We want our supersonic jets and atomic bombs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because the Cold War mentality, you know, Ike wasn't privy to the top level stuff. I don't know why. Everyone's like, he's a great president. All he did was play golf and fuck us over. You know, he had that one chance to overrun Area 51 with the First Army out of Colorado, and he didn't do it because they wrote him a report. That's a military commander of Allied forces? I mean, I would have had the First Army there the minute I found there was any skullduggery going on. I wouldn't take the chance. You know, what kind of overall Allied commander is that? Man, if I heard Alan Dulles and the CIA was out in Nevada doing secret stuff without my knowledge, I would have been out there with 3 armies. And Kennedy tried to do the same thing. And by that time, Alan Dulles and Majestic 12 and all those guys were super powerful. I tried to do it, I think, in 1958. And I think he might have been almost too late then. But why he didn't do that, maybe they mind controlled him. I don't know. Maybe something happened, but he didn't. He had that chance to overrun Area 51 with the First Army. Didn't do it.
Jeez.
I mean, I don't know what, you know, it's easy to be, you know, in hindsight, armchair historian, but God almighty. We can't let it out. People will panic. And it's like some will panic. Most won't.
I just start with, no, you're wrong. Where did you get your intel? Because how do you test that theory?
How do you test that theory? And
how do you test the theory? You're suggesting everybody's going to lose their skulls when I suggest that everyone's just going to be fine. So how about we just do what I say?
The only time they really tested it was 1939 when CBS got Orson Welles and they did War of the Worlds radio show.
Which is not a viable test of releasing a truth. That's a viable test of attempting to scare the crap out of people, which they learned and then they applied in the mass media every day since.
Yeah, but it was cobbled up, I think, by FDR and the Secret Service and FBI. I don't know. There was a group of people who cobbled that up, and they wanted to test because they knew World War II was where they were on the eve of World War II and the Foo Fighters and everything, and they thought, what if the public catches wind? We need to test their, and what it proved was, if you look at a lot of the statistics on that thing, far more people did not panic than those who did.
Right.
I think it's like a 25 versus 75% ratio.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people just grabbed their guns and I knew it, goddamn Martians, and stood on the porch with a loaded shotgun. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people panicked and got in their cars, I think in New Jersey, and they were like, oh my God, they've landed in Paramus or something.
The Hunt for Red October was not a fictional story written by Tom Clancy. It was a story handed to him.
Yeah.
So now what do we do with the rest of his books? Do we know them to be fact or fiction?
Well, a mixture of both.
How do we know? Because I was taught that the Hunt for Red October was a true story that was handed to him. So how do I know from my experience to take anything that was written by him as anything other than what I know to be true in another direction?
It could be. I mean, the Red October story is interesting, but that's not a lot of big deal on an electromagnetic,
Well, the fact that it was the fact that the story was truth and presented as fiction, and then he gets the title of being an author. I mean, there's a lot to consider right there before we even get into the technology of what is the Red October.